Inside Abdeen Palace in Cairo, behind glass display cases, sit hundreds of watches, medals, coins, and personal objects that belong to a king who was never allowed to return for them. The palace has 500 rooms. The man who owned everything inside them left Egypt on a yacht in July 1952, reportedly carrying 204 pieces of luggage, but abandoning collections that had taken a dynasty 147 years to accumulate. He died 13 years later at a restaurant table in Rome, age 45, far from every palace he had ever occupied. The question is not why the monarchy fell. The question is, what happened to the family afterward? The Muhammad Ali Dynasty did not simply lose a throne, it lost an entire material world. Palaces, agricultural estates, urban property, jewel collections, titles, legal identity, and the right to live in the country their ancestor had ruled since 1805. And the objects left behind inside Abdeen became something stranger than museum exhibits. They became evidence of a family that had existed so physically, so lavishly, so deeply embedded in Egypt's infrastructure that even a revolution could not remove every trace. The revolutionary government catalogued what Farouk had accumulated, not just the watches and coins that might befit a monarch, but reportedly razor blades, aspirin bottles, walking sticks, and antique weapons in quantities that suggested something closer to compulsion than collection. In 1954, the government held an auction at Koubbeh Palace, selling portions of the royal collections to international buyers. The auction catalogue itself became a kind of document. A dynasty's intimate accumulations reduced to lot numbers, priced and sold to strangers. The state inherited what the family left behind, curated the king's private obsessions as a public exhibition, and monetized whatever it chose not to display. Visitors now walk through museum wings at Abdeen, silver galleries, arms collections, medal displays, viewing possessions the family can no longer touch. The dynasty built those rooms. The Republic decides who enters them. To understand how a family falls that far, you have to understand how high they climbed. Muhammad Ali, an Ottoman military commander of Albanian origin, seized control of Egypt in 1805. He was not born royal. He made himself royal through force, modernization, and strategic brutality. Reorganizing the military, expanding agriculture, building canals and factories, and turning Egypt into a cotton-producing power that attracted European investment and European interference in almost equal measure. His descendants inherited not just a throne, but a modernization project, and the family's wealth grew alongside it. The dynasty's grip tightened in 1866 when an Ottoman firman changed the succession law from the eldest male in the broader family to primogeniture through the Khedive's direct line. The change concentrated power in one branch. It also meant that one weak ruler in that branch could bring down everything the family had built. Khedive Ismail, Muhammad Ali's grandson, pushed the ambition further than the treasury could sustain, commissioning an opera house, presiding over the lavish opening celebrations of the Suez Canal in 1869. Modernizing Cairo's urban layout, and spending so extravagantly that Egypt's debt spiraled beyond recovery. European creditors closed in. In 1879, under pressure from both the European powers and the Ottoman Sultan, Ismail was forced from power. He left Egypt aboard the royal yacht Mahroussa, a vessel built at the Samuda Brothers shipyard in London in the 1860s, around 478 feet long. One of the first ships to transit the Suez Canal at its opening. That ship would perform the same duty again, 73 years later, for another member of the same family. The dynasty's exit vessel would outlive the dynasty itself. British troops occupied Egypt in 1882, and from that point forward, the dynasty's survival depended on cooperation with Britain. The family kept the palaces, the titles, and the ceremony. Britain kept the strategic control. The arrangement evolved. The Khedivate became a sultanate in 1914, then a kingdom in 1922 under Farouk's father, King Fuad I. But the fundamental dependency remained. Fuad was a shrewd political operator who navigated British relations while cultivating a degree of institutional independence for the Egyptian crown. He understood that the monarchy's power was conditional. His son would learn that lesson too late. The monarchy looked sovereign. Its sovereignty was borrowed. And that gap would eventually poison the dynasty's relationship with the Egyptian public. Because every nationalist who resented British control also resented the family that survived by accommodating it. King Farouk inherited this trap in 1936, when Fuad died. He was 16 years old. And for a brief, remarkable period, he was one of the most popular monarchs in the Middle East. Young, handsome, educated partly at the Royal Military Academy in Woolwich, England, he seemed to represent a fresh start, a modern king for a country that wanted both independence and stability. Crowds lined Cairo's streets for his public appearances. Newspapers treated him with genuine enthusiasm. The Egyptian public wanted to believe in him, and for a while he gave them reasons to. He moved between palaces that most Egyptians could barely imagine. Abdeen for official business, its 500 rooms hosting audiences, ministerial meetings and state functions. Koubbeh Palace in Heliopolis, where he had spent much of his childhood, surrounded by extensive gardens. Montazah on the Alexandria waterfront, with its Mediterranean terraces, its distinctive tower, its Salamlek and Haramlek buildings, and its private beach. Ras El Tin overlooking Alexandria's harbour. Each palace required hundreds of staff: servants, guards, kitchen workers, gardeners, drivers, maintenance crews. The royal household was not just a residence, it was an economy. The court hosted diplomatic receptions, state banquets, horse racing at the Gezira Sporting Club, and a social calendar that mixed European-style formality with Egyptian public spectacle. Royal women, queens and princesses served as patrons of charitable organisations and appeared at public events, their household appointments carrying quiet political significance. The king sat at the centre of an elaborate social political machine where access meant influence and proximity to the crown-shaped careers, marriages and fortunes. The 1938 royal wedding to Safina Zulfikar, renamed Queen Farida in keeping with the royal family's tradition of names beginning with the letter F, was a national event covered extensively in the press. She was young, elegant, well-connected within the Egyptian elite, and the marriage was celebrated with genuine popular enthusiasm. The couple occupied a world of protocol and privilege that appeared permanent. But inside this world, two problems were already forming. The first was political. The second was personal, and neither would stay hidden for long. The political fracture came in February 1942, and it never healed. British Ambassador Miles Lampson, furious at Farouk's reluctance to appoint a pro-British government during wartime, surrounded Abdeen Palace with British tanks and armoured cars. Lampson entered the palace with an armed escort and presented Farouk with an ultimatum: appoint the government Britain wanted, or abdicate. He reportedly carried a drafted abdication document, already prepared. Farouk was advised against resistance. He capitulated. The King of Egypt had been humiliated in his own throne room by the foreign power that kept his family on the throne. Lampson reportedly described the confrontation afterward in his diary with a tone some historians characterize as imperial satisfaction. The political damage was immediate and permanent. Egyptian nationalists saw a monarch who could not protect his own sovereignty. The military saw a king who could be bullied by tanks at his own gate. The public saw a system that looked magnificent, but answered to someone else. The ceremony continued the next day. The protocol resumed. But everyone inside the system understood what had happened. Farouk never recovered politically from that night. The protector had become the instrument of the king's destruction. The personal problem was succession. Queen Farida bore 3 daughters, Feril, Fawzia and Fathia, but no son. In a dynasty where male primogeniture determined the crown's future, the absence of a male heir created mounting pressure that no amount of ceremony could disguise. Farouk's response was divorce. In 1948, after 10 years of marriage, he ended the union. Farida, the queen who had entered the palace as the celebrated bride of a popular young king, left it as a discarded wife whose principal failure, in the dynasty's eyes, was biological. She had given the monarchy 3 princesses. The monarchy wanted a prince. The divorce solved the succession problem. It created a human one. Farida did not disappear. She stayed in Egypt, began studying painting, encouraged by her uncle, the celebrated Egyptian artist Mahmoud Said, and slowly built a second identity as a serious artist. She exhibited at Cairo galleries. She sold canvases. Her art became not just a pursuit, but a livelihood. The queen, who had been defined entirely by her marriage to the king, would eventually be remembered more for the paintings she produced after that marriage ended than for the decades she spent inside the palace. The discarded queen outlasted the king who discarded her, in dignity, in creative output, and in years. She died in 1988. He did not make it past 1965. Farouk remarried in 1951. His second wife, Nariman Sadek, came from an upper-middle-class commoner background, a departure from the usual dynastic marriage calculations. The wedding was lavish, covered extensively in the press, designed to renew the monarchy's public image. The ceremony performed permanence while the monarchy's foundations were already cracking, and the marriage produced exactly what Farouk wanted: a son. Ahmad Fuad was born on January 16, 1952. The dynasty finally had its male heir. The problem was timing. The boy arrived into a monarchy that had roughly 6 months left to live. The heir who was supposed to secure the dynasty's future would become king of a country that was about to stop having kings. Before the fall, though, 2 more family stories expose how the dynasty was fracturing from within. Princess Fawzia, Farouk's eldest sister, had married Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran, in 1939. The wedding was designed to unite 2 of the Middle East's most prominent Muslim monarchies, a diplomatic spectacle connecting Cairo and Tehran through bloodline. Fawzia was reportedly considered one of the most beautiful women of her era, photographed in portraits that circulated internationally. The match seemed like a triumph of royal strategy. It was personally miserable. Fawzia found the Iranian court isolating, the climate difficult, the marriage strained. She bore 1 daughter, Princess Shahnaz, then divorced the Shah in 1945 and returned to Egypt, where she later remarried Colonel Ismail Chirine in 1949. The historical echo is what makes her story extraordinary. Fawzia had been formerly connected to 2 thrones. Both would be destroyed by revolution. Egypt's in 1952, Iran's in 1979. She survived both collapses, living quietly in Cairo for decades, and died in 2013 at the age of 91. A woman who had stood inside 2 royal systems and watched each one shatter, and who outlived both by decades. Then there was Princess Fathia, Farouk's youngest sister, whose story proves the dynasty was punishing its own members before the revolution punished all of them. In 1950, Fathia married Riyad Ghali, a Coptic Christian commoner who had served as a royal advisor, reportedly without Farouk's consent. Farouk was furious. He stripped Fathia of her royal title and cut her off financially. She moved to the United States, exiled by her own brother for defying the dynasty's marriage rules. 2 years later, the revolution made those rules meaningless. The princess, who had been expelled from the family for marrying the wrong man, watched from America as the entire family was expelled from the country. Fathia died in 1976, killed by her former husband in Los Angeles. She had been punished for choosing personal freedom inside a system that demanded obedience. The revolution gave the rest of the family the same loss of status that Farouk had imposed on her voluntarily. While the dynasty fractured internally, Farouk accelerated toward the external collapse. After the 1942 humiliation, the king retreated increasingly into private excess. Gambling at Cairo's clubs and European casinos, travel to the French Riviera, Italy, Switzerland, nightlife that became its own public spectacle, a car collection reportedly painted entirely red, feasting that visibly transformed his body from the slim young king the public had adored into the heavy figure international newspapers photographed at restaurant tables. The press constructed the image of a playboy monarch, a king more interested in casinos than governance. Egyptian press coverage, though more restrained under censorship, carried the same undercurrent. The 1948 defeat in the Palestine War further damaged the military's confidence. Officers who had fought, lost, and blamed their leadership for poor equipment and corrupt supply chains began organizing in secret. Among them was a young colonel named Gamal Abdel Nasser. Farouk's court, meanwhile, continued performing. Protocol still governed audiences, servants still moved through corridors, the palaces still hosted receptions. But the system had become a bubble. The people closest to the king were the least likely to deliver honest assessments of his position. Ministers who depended on royal favor did not challenge the king's assumptions. Courtiers who lived inside the palace economy did not describe the resentment building on the streets outside. The palace existed to serve the king. It had become the structure that prevented him from seeing the threat. By the summer of 1952, the only people who still believed in Farouk's reign were the ones living inside his palaces. The people outside them, the officers, the nationalists, the public, had already made their decision. July 23, 1952. The free officers moved. Military units seized key installations across Cairo. The coup was swift, coordinated, and largely bloodless. Farouk was not in Cairo. He was at Montazah Palace in Alexandria, the summer residence with the Mediterranean gardens and the private beach that would soon belong to the Egyptian public. The king, who had once been surrounded by crowds of admirers, was now surrounded by soldiers who wanted him gone. Negotiations followed. The free officers, led publicly by General Mohammed Naguib, but architecturally by Nasser, gave Farouk a choice: abdicate or face consequences. On July 26, 1952, 3 days after the coup, Farouk signed the abdication document at Ras El Tin Palace, the same palace that overlooked the harbour where the Mahroussa was docked. The walk from the signing desk to the gangplank was the distance between king and exile. Farouk abdicated not for himself alone, but in favour of his infant son. Ahmad Fuad, barely 6 months old, became King Ahmad Fuad II. An infant who could not hold a pen now technically held the Egyptian throne. The abdication document, a single piece of paper, ended a dynasty that had ruled for 147 years. Farouk boarded the Mahroussa. The ship that had carried his ancestor Khedive Ismail into exile in 1879 now carried the last adult king of Egypt along the same route, away from the country, across the Mediterranean, into a future defined entirely by what he could no longer be. The dynasty's exits repeated on the same vessel, 73 years apart. Same ship, same family, same direction. Reportedly, around 204 pieces of luggage accompanied him, though the exact number varies across sources. What he could not carry filled 500 rooms. The infant king's reign was a formality. A regency council governed in Ahmad Fuad's name, but the real power belonged entirely to the free officers. On June 18, 1953, less than a year after the coup, Egypt was declared a republic. The monarchy was formally abolished. Ahmad Fuad II, who had been king for approximately 11 months without ever exercising a moment of authority, was no longer king of anything. He was not yet 2 years old. What followed was systematic. The revolutionary government did not simply remove the crown, it dismantled the dynasty's material existence inside Egypt. Confiscation laws seized royal property, palaces, urban real estate, and agricultural estates, reportedly totaling tens of thousands of feddans of farmland. The family that had been among Egypt's largest landowners was stripped of virtually everything inside the country. The land did not sit idle. Under Nasser's agrarian reform, royal estates were redistributed to Egyptian peasants. The dynasty's deepest source of wealth became the new republic's most popular policy. The family's loss was the public's gain, and that equation made any reversal politically impossible. The palaces were repurposed one by one. Abdeen became a presidential palace and eventually a partial museum, its display cases filled with the collections of the king who had been expelled. Koubbeh Palace, where the 1954 auction would sell his possessions, became government property. Ras El Tin remained under military and government control. Montazah, the king's private Mediterranean retreat with its tower, its gardens, its private beach, became public gardens. Ordinary Egyptians picnicked on the lawns where Farooq had entertained foreign dignitaries. The private shoreline became open coastline. Royal symbols were removed from public buildings. Titles of nobility were abolished by decree. The Muhammad Ali family's name, which had defined Egypt's ruling structure for nearly a century and a half, became politically toxic overnight. Nasser did not merely remove the crown. He redesigned Egypt so the crown had no socket to fit back into. Arab socialism, anti-imperialism, land reform, and a new national mythology that had no room for kings. The buildings survived. The family did not, at least not inside them. Farooq landed in Italy and entered a kind of exile that consumed him from the inside. Rome became his replacement court. But instead of throne rooms, there were hotel lobbies and villa rentals. Instead of state banquets, there were restaurant tables. Instead of diplomatic receptions, there were nightclub appearances and gossip column mentions. The former king became a fixture of international cafe society, recognized in Roman restaurants, photographed at tables. His weight gain and spending habits tracked by the same international press that had once covered his coronation. The man who had been cheered by millions was now observed by waiters. The marriage to Nariman did not survive exile. She divorced him in 1954 and returned to Egypt, where she married Dr. Adam al-Nakib, an Egyptian physician. Nariman's trajectory is one of the strangest compression acts in royal history. She went from commoner to queen to exile to commoner again in approximately 3 years. The crown had landed on her, rested briefly, and lifted off. She lived the rest of her life as a private citizen in Cairo, the woman who had briefly been Queen of Egypt and then simply was not. She died in 2005, decades after the title had ceased to mean anything. Farooq, meanwhile, stayed in Rome. He reportedly held a monegasque residency, his legal status permanently ambiguous. The man who had been sovereign of one of the most important countries in the Middle East was now essentially stateless. An ordinary passport where a royal decree had once been. Hotel rooms where palaces had once been. The physical architecture of Exile was restaurant bills, travel documents, and rented addresses. He was attributed with a famous quip. Though the exact wording and occasion vary across sources, that one day there would be only 5 kings left. The kings of England, diamonds, hearts, spades, and clubs. Whether he said it precisely that way is uncertain. That it captured his situation is not. 13 years after leaving Egypt, on March 18, 1965, Farouk collapsed at a restaurant in Rome, reportedly the Ile-de-France, though some sources name other locations. He was 45 years old. Some conspiracy theories about poisoning circulated afterward, but no credible evidence supports them. The former king of Egypt died at a dinner table far from every palace, every throne room, every ceremonial corridor he had ever occupied. The man who had inherited power at 16, been humiliated by British tanks at 21, divorced one queen for producing daughters, married another for producing a son, fathered a king who never reigned, and fled his country on a yacht carrying reportedly 200 pieces of luggage. That man's final public scene was a restaurant in a foreign city. The palace had 500 rooms. The table seated 1. He was buried initially at a Rome cemetery far from the family tombs in Cairo before his remains were returned to Egypt. But Farouk was only one member of the family. The others had to keep living, and each of them solved the problem of being former royalty differently. Queen Farida, the first wife, the woman discarded for producing daughters instead of a son, built the most dignified afterlife of any of them. She remained in Egypt after the revolution, lived in circumstances modest by any standard and unrecognizable compared to palace life, and devoted herself to painting. She studied under established Egyptian artists, exhibited at Cairo galleries, sold canvases to support herself. Her art became her livelihood and her identity. The studio replaced the palace. The canvas replaced the protocol, and the creative independence she found after being discarded proved more durable than anything the crown had offered her. When she died in 1988 at 67, she was remembered at least as much as a painter as a queen, arguably more. The woman Farouk discarded outlasted his reputation by decades. Princess Fawzia stayed in Cairo too. She lived quietly with her second husband, Colonel Cherin, through the revolution and its long aftermath. She did not flee. She did not make political statements. She did not write memoirs or sell her story. She simply remained. A woman who had once been both an Egyptian princess and briefly an Iranian empress, now living as a private citizen in the city where she had been born. She died in 2013 at 91, having witnessed the fall of the Egyptian monarchy in 1952 and the fall of the Iranian monarchy in 1979. 2 thrones, 2 revolutions. One woman who survived both and lived long enough to see neither restored. Ahmad Fuad II, the infant king, grew up in exile. After Farouk's death in 1965, the boy was raised between Switzerland and France, reportedly attending La Rosie, the elite Swiss boarding school known for educating the children of deposed royalty, the institutional replacement for palace nurseries and royal tutors. He studied at European universities and went into finance and business. The child, who had technically been king of Egypt for 11 months, became a European professional. He maintained the style of head of the royal house and has occasionally visited Egypt since the early 1990s. The king who never reigned carried a title that no Egyptian law recognized. The extended family, the dozens of princes and princesses from various branches of the Muhammad Ali dynasty, scattered across continents. Some ended up in Switzerland, France, Monaco, Italy, or the United Kingdom. Some married into European aristocratic families. Some lived on diminishing resources, selling whatever they had managed to take with them, relying on social connections that survived their political status. Some worked in business and finance. Some fought legal battles over confiscated property that dragged on for decades, navigating a political system that had been built on the act of taking what they were trying to recover. Most gained little. The Republic had no incentive to return what the revolution had redistributed. The family that had all lived within a network of Egyptian palaces became a diaspora connected by a surname that carried historical weight, but no legal authority, no property, and no political function. And the revolution consumed more than just the dynasty. General Muhammad Naguib, the man who had been the public face of the free officers, who had stood before Egypt as the leader of the movement that ended the monarchy, was himself sidelined by Nasser within 2 years and placed under house arrest. The man who publicly led the revolution that deposed a king was confined by the system that replaced it. The revolution ate its own frontman. Then, in the 1970s, something shifted. President Anwar Sadat, who had been one of the original free officers, but whose political instincts differed sharply from Nasser's, permitted Farouk's remains to be returned from their initial burial site and interred at the Al-Rifai Mosque in Cairo. The same mosque that already held the remains of Khedive Ismail, King Fuad I, and other Muhammad Ali dynasty members. The king, who had been expelled alive, was accepted back dead. The mosque would later also receive the body of the last Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who died in exile in 1980. 2 deposed monarchs, one Egyptian, one Iranian, connected through Princess Fawzia's marriage. Buried in the same building in a country neither ruled at death. The mosque became a quiet convergence point for fallen thrones. Sadat's gesture was political as much as it was personal. It signaled that the Republic was secure enough to accommodate the old dynasty's dead, without feeling threatened by them. The living family members remained scattered. The political system that had replaced them remained intact. The titles remained abolished. The land remained redistributed. But the body came home, and that mattered, not because it changed anything, but because it proved that exile had a physical endpoint even when restoration did not. Today, the Muhammad Ali dynasty holds no political role in Egypt. The surviving members are private citizens scattered across continents. The family name appears in history books, tourism brochures, and museum captions. But it commands no legal authority, no governmental function, no constitutional standing. The palaces they built still stand. Abdeen remains in central Cairo, used for presidential functions, and partially open as a museum where Farouk's collections sit behind glass. The silver galleries, the weapons displays, the medals, the objects that the king accumulated compulsively, and the state catalogued methodically. Montazah's gardens are still public, ordinary families walking paths the king once walked alone. Koubbeh is still government property. Ras El Tin still overlooks the harbour where the Mahroussa once waited. The Mahroussa itself still exists, an Egyptian naval vessel, one of the oldest yachts still afloat, maintained by the same state that used it to carry the dynasty's rulers out of the country. The ship outlived the dynasty. The dynasty built modern Egypt's infrastructure, railways, canals, public buildings, the Egyptian Museum, the groundwork of modern Cairo, and was then erased from the city's political identity within a decade. The family that shaped Egypt for 147 years exists now only in glass cases, old photographs, mosque tombs, scattered descendants, a banker who was once a king, a painter who was once a queen, and the rooms themselves. And those rooms are still there. Abdeen Palace, 500 rooms still standing in central Cairo. Inside, behind glass, the watches and medals and coins and strange collections that belonged to a king who left on a yacht that had already performed the same duty 73 years earlier. The yacht still floats. The mosque holds the body. The gardens are public. The paintings Farida made survive somewhere beyond the palace walls, the work of a woman who was told she had failed the dynasty and then outlived it. The infant king became a banker. The princess who married a shah watched 2 empires fall and outlived them both. The sister who married for love was exiled by her brother before the revolution exiled everyone else. The dynasty that built modern Egypt survives in display cases, tourist photographs, auction catalogues, and rooms full of objects that belong to people who can no longer enter them.